right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to all. Thank you for joining today's webinar, From Vision to Funding, How Nonprofits Successfully Launch Cloud Technology Projects. We're thrilled to have you with us today. I'm Zach Miller with the Social Innovation Summit, a platform for connection, purpose, and progress that brings together a vibrant community of leaders across business, philanthropy, technology, and social impact to exchange bold ideas, forge unexpected partnerships, and help shape what's next. We're gearing up for our flagship summit this June 3rd, 4th in San Francisco, where more than 1,000 innovators, change makers, and executives will gather to explore bold ideas and scalable solutions. But throughout the year, we're always bringing our community together in more focused settings like these for our annual calendar of events. Today's event is hosted in partnership with our longtime friends at Amazon Web Services, a team that continues to lead by example when it comes to supporting nonprofits through technology, capacity building, and visionary funding, like the AWS Imagine Grant. We're incredibly grateful for their commitment to the nonprofit sector and their belief in the power of technology to drive meaningful, measurable impact. Before we get started today, I also want to take a moment to thank all of our annual partners, all of whom make this work possible. Your ongoing support fuels the year-round programming and conversations that help us and help our community turn ideas into action. Today's session will be packed with practical insights from nonprofit leaders who've taken big ideas and turned them into successful, well-funded cloud projects. And we hope you'll leave inspired and ready with actionable ideas and takeaways to do the same. As the conversation unfolds, please go ahead and drop any questions into the Q&A function of the Zoom. Our speakers will take them live towards the end of the panel and answer your questions. And so now, without any further ado, to get things started, I'd like to introduce Irene Blanchard-Wu from the AWS team, who will moderate this conversation. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. My name is Irene, and I am on the Amazon Web Services nonprofit business team. And the reason we're all here today is because our three amazing panelists, they are all part of organizations that had just won the AWS Imagine Grant. And so the Imagine Grant is our yearly public funding opportunity that provides unrestricted cash, AWS cloud credits, technical support, training support, and marketing support to nonprofit organizations in the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, and Australia and New Zealand. And so, this is a pretty special grant because it really fills a gap in the funding space right now that's lacking, that's really focused on technology innovation and R&D. And so today we're going to hear from three amazing panelists that's going to talk about their stories of how they came up with a great idea, realized that technology is a force multiplier, designed the project, and got funding to support their big ideas. And so without further ado, I would love to welcome Bill, Chief Technology Officer from RAIN, Dr. Emily Darling from Wildlife Conservation Society, and Dr. Andrew Mages from the Institute for Systems Biology. So welcome, panelists. And to get us started, Bill, Emily, and Andrew, I would love the audience to get to know you a little bit. And we could start with Bill. Please tell us who are you and your organization, your mission, and what was your Imagine Grant project? We'll start with,
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all so much for coordinating this and making this happen here today. And super excited to be here to meet with you all. So my name is Bill Bondurant. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. And we provide services for victims and survivors of sexual violence and sexual assault. And the critical project that we've been working on is how do we meet people where they're at, right? And so therefore, today we know that victims and survivors of sexual assault exist on different platforms, right? Gaming platforms, messaging platforms, and such, right? And so therefore, how can we use technology to be able to meet people where they're at, right? So how do we integrate with WhatsApp, Signal, Discord, Snapchat, Roblox? I could go on with the different platforms. And so therefore, how do we have a highly automated, highly scalable solution that enables us to go meet people where they're at? And again, super excited to be here with y'all today.
Thank you, Bill. Emily, I'll go to you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Emily Darling. I'm the Director of Coral Reef Conservation at the Wildlife Conservation Society. WCS is a global conservation organization working in more than 60 countries to save wildlife and wild places with a mission to help both nature and people thrive. I'm a coral reef scientist, so I'm happiest with a scuba tank on my back, counting corals underwater, and then using this data to identify and protect climate resilient reefs with scientists around the world. I'm here to share about Mermaid. This is WCS's cloud-based data platform that supports scientists and conservation practitioners to faster collect, manage, and analyze their coral reef data. We built this as a solution to get data into the hands of decision makers faster, and it's working. Currently, Mermaid is used in over 51 countries by over 100 organizations. And it's one of the largest open source cloud data repositories of coral reef data.
Thank you, Emily. And Andrew, last but not least.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Irene. My name is Andrew Magis. I'm the Director of Data Science at the Institute for Systems Biology, which is a nonprofit research institute in Seattle. And our mission is really to bring together complex data. We collect data on a wide range of patient cohorts using a wide range of multimodal methods from genetics, from the blood, from the stool, as we'll talk about, and from lifestyle and behavior, and try to pull that all together to improve human health and ultimately translate that into the clinic as well. And so this particular project, which focuses on the microbiome, which is the community of microbes that exist in all of our guts that we're essentially born with and evolves and grows with us as we develop, and mediates the relationship between our diet and our health, and in terms of what we extract from our food. So this project, My Digital Gut, which was partially funded by the AWS Imagine Grant, builds a digital twin of your microbial community, which is essentially a representation of that in a computer. And then we can use that digital twin to perturb your microbiome, and simulate what will happen if you eat certain foods or take certain probiotics or take certain prebiotics in the production of the types of things that you want to extract from your food, and the reduction of things that you don't want to extract from your food. And so the goal here is to give people personalized insights into how their microbiome influences their health. And we are developing that in using funding from the AWS Imagine Grant and on the AWS cloud. I'm excited to talk about it.
Thank you, Andrew, Emily, and Bill. And I actually got my test kit yesterday, so I'm very excited to see what my microbiome looks like. But so it's interesting because all of your organizations, all three, I mean, your mission area is wildly different. And yet you're all using technology in such innovative ways to force multiply for your mission. And I've read all three of your applications, of course, and every year we get a lot of applications, and I would say, they're kind of like two types of applications that we see. Those that lead with the technology, and those that lead with the problem statement, the challenge, really honing in on what is it that you're addressing. And then in the process of, I would say, working backwards, designing from the problem, addressing the problem, you realize that technology could be a component that really kind of accelerates what you want to achieve. And I would say all three of your applications focused on the challenge first. And so could you please share with the audience this process of how you worked backwards from the problem, the challenge, and then you had this vision of how it would look like. And then from there, you came up with the solution and then incorporated technology as a component. And so, Andrew, I'll start with you on
Yeah,
that.
well, in our case, it's a pretty clean story. I'm glad you framed it like that because, as with most things at ISB, it all starts with a research question and a research project, right? And so this is not my own personal research. This is the research of associate professor, excuse me, at ISB, Sean Gibbons, who is a microbiome expert. And so he's been studying the microbiome for many years, collecting patient data and analyzing how it affects our health. And so, his group at ISB developed a process called MyCom for microbial communities. It's essentially a mechanistic model that takes inputs from microbiome sequencing data, like whole genome sequencing, but for all the bacteria in your gut, sequence it all at once. And it's essentially the same technology. It's just applied to poop instead of DNA extracted from your blood or saliva, and then uses that to build every single reaction that could occur within your microbiome and simulate the outputs. And they published this in scientific peer-reviewed journals. They also validated it using ex vivo experiments, essentially taking poop and growing them to the lab and then feeding certain things to it and then measuring what the outputs were so they could determine that it was making accurate predictions. And then they developed the software in their lab to do this. But what the Imagine Grant essentially gave us the opportunity to do was Sean always had a vision of taking his research and making it available to everyday people, right? He feels like these predictions can be valuable in helping people improve their health, select what diets they should eat, and potentially what prebiotics or probiotics they might take. So we always wanted this vision of a citizen scientist, somebody who's interested in their own data. But in order to do that, we needed to build a user interface. We needed to build automated infrastructure to compute these things at scale. It's very computationally intensive. And we needed a way to tie it all together. And so for that, we had a lot of experience with AWS in the past. And, he came to me and we started this project together.
Andrew, you talked about citizen science, and I know, Emily, your Mermaid platform is also the citizen scientists are one of your target populations for your platform. Can you talk more about how you approached your project and how that ties into what Andrew was saying?
For sure. So, we're really focused on how do we bring data to meet the problems that coral reefs are facing today. And obviously, anyone who's, read the news or seen the headlines about coral reefs knows that it's not great. 50% of the world's coral reefs have been lost since the 1950s. One of the main threats is climate change and marine heat waves, but obviously that cascades into more complex problems of pollution, overfishing, unsustainable tourism, et cetera. But we know we can manage local pressures as conservation groups and governments and local communities. And we know that also that corals can survive in some climate cool spots. And these cool spots are really important blueprints of how to connect coral recovery. Hopefully into a cooler climate future for the world. So we really need to find these climate resilient coral reefs. We can only do that with underwater monitoring data collected by scientists, or also we're moving into helping citizen scientists help us as well. This is kind of like a zombie apocalypse for those of you into The Last of Us lately, where we know humans are under zombie apocalypse. There are places where human communities can survive, and protecting those is critical so that eventually you can get a hold on the zombie apocalypse. That's kind of where we're thinking, where coral reefs need to go in the next 50 years. It's going to be tough, but there are places they can survive. How do we find those, predict them, forecast them? But only 12% of the world's coral reefs are currently monitored, and 100 countries need this information for their national biodiversity action plans. So our problem was really, how do we scale up data collection of what coral reefs look like? How do we also look at the types of corals on a reef? Because that tells us a lot about different ways that reefs are resilient to climate change. So typically scientists take images of reefs. We have done for decades, or a decade. We put a grid on these photos and then would manually classify each point by typing them into a spreadsheet. So that's really where technology, and in particular the AWS Imagine Go Further Faster grant comes in, is we're building AI and machine learning models to process these reef images faster. We want to scale coral reef monitoring from 12% to 100% in 10 years. And that obviously requires not just the technology, but also getting it into the hands of the right users. And for us, that's possibly divers and citizen scientists. There's over 10 million active scuba divers worldwide. A lot of them are going out now with GoPros that are actually high enough resolution to be taking these images. And so we're really thinking about how do we use AWS cloud architecture, like open data buckets, all the cloud service workers and architectures and models to move from simple deep learning engines that we know can process these images 700 times faster already than manual classification. But how do we, dynamically build and improve models? How do we save the annotations with human in the loop models? And then eventually, how do we move to human out of the loop models? So really here, technology is super cool, but it's also the scaling mechanism. We want to, support governments who are making important new commitments to protect their coral reefs, but they need to know where these important coral reefs are. And so that's where Mermaid is moving, and how we've been so fortunate to work with AWS on this problem.
Thank you, Emily. And Bill, I would love to hear your just I'm like hearing this common thread with, I think a lot of you, like, you're thinking really big, this ambitious goal of like the reach, and you're finding technology to be a tool that allow you to get to that level of reaching that you need. And so, Bill, I think you probably could relate to this. Would love to hear how you got started with your solution.
Yeah, for sure. And I think reach is a great word there, right? So when we started to work backwards on our problem was how do we meet people where they're at, right? And so therefore, as RAIN, supporting victims and survivors of sexual assault, hey, we know that demographics change, right? Not everyone wants to pick up the phone and call us. Hey, not everyone wants to go download an app or go to a website, right? So then therefore, how do we meet people where they're at? How do we reach them where they're at, right? And so in the environment today, people are on WhatsApp, kids are on Discord, Kik, Signal, Telegram, Roblox, etc., right? And so therefore, how do we come up with a solution that allows us to go do that, right? We could cobble together a one-off solution to go do that, right? But how do we scale it effectively, right? And so therefore, using AI as an engineering solution to allow us to have a platform as a service, right? That allows us to be able to go connect with those different platforms. Because today it's those things that I just mentioned, but tomorrow it's Irene.com and Bilby.com and, some other, cool kids application where people are playing their games or using for messaging, right? And so how do we effectively scale that, right? And so as a nonprofit, we're pretty frugal down here. And so, having that ability to scale, this way and that way is super critical for us, right? And so using AI as a solution to help us engineer and help us maintain with the different platforms that exist today, whereas the platforms that may exist tomorrow, right? And so the AWS, our partners at AWS were extremely helpful in, hey, you can do this, you can't do that. But the sort of myriad of different things that we wanted to do with it, that's critical for us to be able to have a solution that allows us to have that platform as a service that allows us to be able to connect to the things that exist today, but the things that exist tomorrow, to be able to have that core obligation and responsibility delivered of meeting people where they're at, right? And so our partners at AWS have been super fantastic with helping us figure that out. And as you all can imagine, with the different platforms that are out there today, there's a lot, and so they've been a fantastic partner with us. But it all started with just working backwards from that sort of statement of, well, how do we reach people, right? And how do we meet people where they're at? And then how do we cobble together a solution that allows us to do that today, but allows us to be able to have that scale and maintainability to do that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm hearing scaling, I'm hearing reach, and meeting people where they are. I mean, it's clearly what all three of you are doing, and there's a lot of like thing you're trying to democratize access to data. You're trying to democratize access to insight solution, with the digital microbiome, and then meeting people where they are, democratize access to solutions to, if something happened to me and I need to reach someone, like instead of finding the avenues right here in my palm on my phone. So this reach, but also the speed of reaching. I think for all three of you, I'm hearing a lot of that. And it got me to thinking, you have a great vision, you have the solution, but you have to start somewhere. And we usually start much smaller than this final vision of reaching everybody. Um, and to start that small, often we need that seed funding. We need someone to trust us, to give us that initial seed funding to experiment, to test and learn, to pilot, to fail, to innovate before you even get to that level of like you have a proof of concept and now you're, maybe ready to productize or get extra funding. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about funding. And especially in this current funding landscape, I'm sure it's top of mind for so many of us. And so for you guys, I mean, especially getting funding for innovation, for R&D, it couldn't have been easy. How did you go about getting that first pot of experiment money? And Andrew, I'll start with you here.
Well, so I guess, we can start with funding kind of the original research, which, a lot of it would have come from, the federal government, because ISB is primarily funded from federal funds, federal grants like NIH or NSF. That would have, really driven the research effort that underpins the My Digital Gut program. And of course, as you mentioned, that's now greatly under threat. And so it's really causing our institution, and I'm sure many others, to kind of look to diversify where their funding sources come from, because it has an uncertain future from where we stand. But to the point of translating this, I mean, so much of science is scientists talking to each other, right? We go to conferences, we talk to scientists, we write papers, and those are mostly read by scientists, and so it's a lot of a very insular culture. And yet we need to communicate our research to the outside world. We need to show the value of our research. We need to demonstrate how, what we're doing is useful and interesting and important, right, to people. And part of that is, outreach to people who aren't scientists, and that can include giving public talks. It could include writing in papers that are read by everyday people, non-scientists. But it can also mean building tools and showcasing your research through trying to give your research or trying to give value to people's everyday lives. And that's what I think of when I think about a citizen scientist, like engaging people in the scientific process, getting them involved with their own data, letting them participate in research, right? And feel like they're a part of it. And so getting funding for this project then is, how do you take the research that's been developed and make that into a product that people will want to use and be aware of, right? And as you say, Irene, that's a trickier proposition, at least in research. I mean, you don't usually, it's a little bit out of our comfort zone as scientists, to say the least, is to make something that's public facing for people to use. And so that's where, Imagine Grant comes in as a great opportunity, right? Because it provides that seed funding. It's unrestricted, as you said. It's based around cloud, which means that you get the credits, you get the money, and then you can take a vision. And then in our case, let's scale mechanistic modeling of the human gut microbiome and provide that to individuals who are not part of a research program. and make that a reality, right? And so for us, as you said, we started with we want to do a pilot study, right? We want to get, we actually did wind up making it into a research study. So we got institutional review board approval. So we actually can use our data for publication. But we want to start, 50 to 100 people. Let's get them involved. Let's get their feedback on what a potential product, alpha version of the product could look like. But how are we going to even get to there, right? We need a little bit of seed funding to build this infrastructure to begin with, and that's where the Imagine Grant came in. We've also, went out to our donors and said, look, we have this funding from AWS. We're going to be able to get to a beta testing version of the platform. Would you like to try it out? And are you willing to contribute some money to help us build this out? And so we took advantage of that as well, going out to some of our donors who are very interested in research, very interested in human health and personalized wellness. And we're able to raise some additional funds that way.
Thank you, Andrew. And Emily, I would love to hear your response to that too, and your own experience, because you're also a scientist and the work that you and your organization does also science related. How is it similar and how is it different? And how did you go about getting that initial funding?
Oh, I was frantically taking some notes because I think there's so much, Andrew, you said, and Bill, also so much about meeting people where they are. And as a scientist who works for an NGO, I obviously have an academic background training and, work with scientists, but you also have to work with a lot of other people. And so one of those other people early on when I started at WCS was learning how to meet people where they are, who are the funders of this conservation work. So philanthropies, have been funding place-based coral reef conservation work at WCS for over 40 years. And I got to, meet some of them in person, tell them about this really important work they're funding in Fiji and Madagascar and Kenya and Indonesia, around the world. And, in that conversation, it came up that, how are we tracking the impact of this work globally? And as a scientist, I was like, yeah, that's a really good question. Here's how we're doing it kind of right now in spreadsheets. But they're like, no, like we really want to think about this faster. How can we look at this impact in different ways? And so I'd really like to give a shout out to Kate Barnes at the Mark MacArthur Foundation, who really gave us our very first seed funding for Mermaid, but also the seed idea. I think sometimes as scientists, we think that we're the only ones who come up with really good ideas. But some of the most interesting, scientific papers that I've published have come from funders who are looking at it from a different way, or different stakeholders. So seed funding and seed ideas, I think really be open to listening to people of what they need, and bring that into how you're solving a problem. So, we really started small. We started with $5,000, $10,000 to some development partners. Shout out to Spark Geo, we've been working with since the very beginning. They started with box and arrow diagrams of how do we take spreadsheets into a back-end schema. And then I ran out of money for a while. And then shout out to Bloomberg Philanthropies, who are obviously very data driven, and said, okay, yeah, let's take a look at this data thing for coral reefs, but you've got to approach it from a perspective more as a tech startup. And so, let's show how you're growing this. I remember very clearly this in-person meeting where I was like, when you get to 5 countries and 100 users who aren't from WCS, call me. And so, then me and our, lead tech developer, we're like, okay, we've got to not only make a tool that works for WCS, we've got to make it work for other people. So we had some friends, some colleagues at WWF, they were doing similar things. We partnered together. Then we had, 2 organizations and more users. So we grew really slowly, being user focused, with things that users needed. They wanted to replace spreadsheets. So Mermaid needed to be as easy to use, as safe to them as spreadsheets, but with the cloud-based infrastructure of QA, QC, standardization, normalization, archiving, being used by people all over the world, feeding through APIs into maps, into downloadable R packages and charts and figures, etc. So I think, that was really important. Start small, connect with users, but also realize what you're missing. So, in this last 2 years, we realized that we were missing an an opportunity for scaling, which is, we were growing really linearly, but there's only so many coral reef scientists out there who are able to, get funding to do transects, scientific surveys underwater. And so how do we scale? Only 12% of the world's coral reefs are monitored. We need to get to 100% or really close, and we can't do that linearly. And so that's where AI and new users really came in. And so I think that discrete cloud technology piece of how do we leverage all this cool ML, SageMaker stuff happening in cloud infrastructure, that we don't have the cloud architecture experience, but we have the domain expertise. That was really the key piece that came together for this particular AWS Imagine Grant.
Thank you, Emily. And I mean, it's very clear that both you and Andrew, you had an idea, but you were really proactive about reaching out to funders and pitching your idea, and then also open to feedback and iterate repeatedly to get to a place where it's usable. It's a very human-centered process, is what I'm hearing. And Bill, I want to shift to you here. And I would love to hear about, how you got the funding, but I'm also thinking, and Emily, you started to touch on this, to start innovating, experimenting, especially with something like technology where it requires such deep expertise, especially once you get to like the more advanced usages, we don't always have that skill in-house. And that's very much a part of the resources that we need. Funding is important, and then the resources and the skill, I mean, that's just as important. And Bill, I know you had just talked about how RAIN is, it's a small and mighty organization, but it's a lean team. And so as you went to get the funding, but also I know you had to augment your tech team with, outside of RAIN. So I would love to hear you talk about that piece too. Like who are all these people that you had to pull in? How did you, get the funding, but also augmented your capabilities? Which often it's not just solvable by just having the money. You need the right people. How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, for sure. And so, the awesome positive working relationship that we have with AWS, right, was critical for that, right? So we knew that, hey, we had to do this, right? So whether it's through a grant or funding, we have an obligation or responsibility to meet people where they're at, right? So as we started to think through, well, how do we do that, right? And so reaching out to our awesome AWS account exec and our solutions architects over there of like, hey, how do I make WhatsApp connect to AWS to connect to my console, right? And having those awesome work backwards sessions, like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's awesome. You can do this. You can't do that. And then, giving us insight as to, well, how about this, right? Before we get too far down the road and figure out, how we, turn this into a highly automatable, highly scalable, AI solution here, let's do a prototype. Okay. And so we spent a measurable amount of time just collaborating with our AWS solutions architect, which was just an extreme extension of our team of like, well, how do we do this, right? As well as our account exec, who opened a lot of doors into other departments within AWS, right? So there's a AWS solution in end user messaging, right? Okay, well, let's go talk to them about how we connect WhatsApp to AWS to connect to our console, right? So that someone who's on WhatsApp can get a hold of us and get help and support. And so I couldn't do that without having that collaboration with AWS, and that allowed us to be able to build that prototype that then says, oh, this is pretty cool. We can make, someone can stay within WhatsApp and they can reach out for us for support for sexual assault and sexual violence, and we can get it to a human being that can provide that appropriate support, right? And so we were able to cobble together that solution together to then be like, okay, cool. Now, how do we do this, and how do we scale this across all the different platforms that are out there, right? And so subsequently, that drove the okay, well, this is going to take some amount of funding to be able to go do that. But hey, we've got a prototype over here and it works. And oh, by the way, even within the prototype, when we enabled it, people were reaching out to us on WhatsApp that maybe they weren't reaching out to us before for help and support, right? So then that subsequently drove okay, cool. So now as a platform, hey, with the appropriate amount of funding and the Imagine grant, hey, now we can go create this platform that allows us to scale that. But none of that would be possible without having that partnership with AWS to where they were, literally like an extension of my team. Where I don't have a solutions architect, so if you trying to keep up with all the awesome and cool things that AWS and Amazon are building every day, that's a full-time job, right? And so having that relationship with them where they open doors with us to the Amplify team and to the end user messaging team to just be like, okay, that's pretty cool. Hey, I didn't know you guys were thinking about doing this. Hey, maybe we should get this on the roadmap, right? And go provide that solution. But that sort of collaboration with AWS was critical then to help us get that prototype and then subsequently get the Imagine grant, because we proved that, hey, this thing that was in our head, right? And we're down here as Rain being like, it wouldn't be awesome and super great if we could do all this awesome stuff. Well, Amazon and AWS really helped facilitate the solutioning on our prototype to where now we're like, okay, cool. Now, how do we, subsequently go do that for the different applications and services that we want to be able to scale and connect to? And so having that relationship was critical, and I can't thank them enough for answering my chimes and Slacks 24/7 of, what about this and what about that? And just opening doors and saying, hey, I don't know the answer, but I know someone who does know the answer over here at AWS. And so that was super critical for us. And then subsequently, by having that prototype and knowing that it works and knowing that real people, real human beings who need help and support from Rain is legitimate, right? And so and it supports our spirit and mission of meet people where they're at, right? And so that certainly helped us turn that corner and make it from just an idea in Bill's head to a real thing that subsequently got us the funding and the grant to move forward with creating an awesome service that we can now scale across to other platforms.
Thank you, Bill. And I'm starting to see a lot of questions come in. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to put in the Q&A chat box, and then we'll address them at the end. But Emily, I know that you guys applied for the Imagine Grant back in 2019 or the early days of the program. And you didn't get it at first, but then you came back last year. I mean, it was very clear that you've come super far with your project, and then of course you won. And I know, in that process, you also worked a lot with the solutions architects and just our tech team here as part of your extension of your tech team. Can you talk more about that process for you and your team?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was going to be the next thing out of my mouth, was that we'd applied once, before, I think maybe even twice, like in 2016, anyways. And we didn't get it. And so the Imagine grant totally wasn't on our radar. We'd had some free credits thanks to AWS. We were running out. So we, called up Joe Flasher and put us in touch with Chris Stoner of the AWS Open Data team. And they're like, hey, yeah, we want to help you. We can get you more credits. But like, have you thought about an Imagine grant? And we're like, oh, we've applied for that before. Like, we just, we shouldn't. But they're like, no, like, why don't you talk to Eduardo White, was our amazing exec manager. They're like, talk to Eduardo. We think you have something here. And you're right. We were at that place where we had a discrete cloud technology piece and problem that was really ready for AWS to help us with. Ben Turnbull was our solutions architect. Bill, I totally, just wanted to lift up what you said. Like, we talked to them multiple times before the application. They walked us through, specific pieces like looking at our diagrams of how we wanted to use different cloud pieces and said, no, 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 what if your diagram looked like this? Or let's add these pieces in here. Or, I think as a nonprofit with WCS, we're a good case study for this because we're not an ML AI center in any way. We have the mission, we had a tech proof of concept that people are using Mermaid, but we really needed that cloud architecture expertise for how can we build in AI and ML models? How can we have people save data in the cloud? How can we save their new annotations of corals and use them to improve models? And we like have this pickle file. And Ben was like, that's super cute. We love pickle files. And like, here's ML flow, here's SageMaker. How can we bring all that in so you can have a dynamic models and people choosing multiple models? And it was just like, this is what we wanted. This is what we saw for, but we had no idea it was possible. So I'd say, this collaboration during the development of the grant was key. Totally opening doors, Bill, as you said, connecting us to the open data team. We've, now have, we're on the way to an open data bucket connected to the AWS grant, which is, so it's just two separate things, but different parts of the AWS organization. It just seemed to move seamlessly once we were really clear on what we needed. And I'd also just say, the AWS team wasn't pushy in any way. They were really long-term focused and centered on the sustainability of what we could afford after this sort of R&D phase. Like, what is the long-term pieces we can build that we can afford? We're a nonprofit, we need to be really frugal and careful. So, I think the whole process of writing the grant was key to really lean on and use the AWS team. We also did a lot of work and homework ourselves to make sure that when we were coming to them, we were like, okay, what about this? And here's what we're thinking. And so that collaboration, regardless of whether we I think we, would have even gotten the grant. That would have been so critical and helped us to where we wanted to go. We're really honored and grateful to now have that continued relationship to, keep working on this. But, even just the process of applying with the AWS team was really transformational for us.
Thank you, Emily. And Andrew, I know we have a lot of research related teams and programs and staff. And I know, Andrew, you guys presented actually the microgut biome at one of the research roundtables months ago. And I think it was organized by us. It was in Seattle, I think. But yeah, like what was your collaboration like with I guess your extended tech team?
Yeah, well, I just want to echo what Emily and Bill said, and also just for the audience that, having a great working relationship with your AWS account executive is very easy. They want to talk to you. They schedule regular meetings to meet, talk about your ongoing projects, how to, bring in the solutions architects. In our case, I started out working with RF Khan, who was my account executive, and now it's Sarah Fox, and we were working with the great solutions architect, Patrick Guha, actually. And we've had a long history with AWS at ISB. I've been working in the cloud for many years. I can say that when COVID hit, AWS, we were already supporting our research there. ISB was running clinical trials in COVID. We were collecting huge amounts of data which would be very expensive to store and analyze, and in the immune system and all sorts of whole genome sequencing of patient cohorts. And so, we were already working closely with AWS there to apply for their diagnostic initiative to get credits to analyze those data and generate a lot of research, high profile research that came out of that. So we had a good working relationship with our account executives already. We were pretty familiar with the cloud and how AWS supports research. And so it wasn't a large leap, from going from the ideation of my digital gut to, let's work with AWS to see if we can, to build a solution that we can enable these citizen science. And then, talking to Sarah, she mentioned the Imagine Grant, right? And so, it said, oh, well, this looks like a potentially a good opportunity for us to apply, right? So we have in-house developers at ISB. It's a very programming heavy place, and so we work with the cloud a lot. But nevertheless, knowing about the latest technologies that AWS is making available, knowing about the various mechanisms that you can, the ways you can tie things together, and always, having the conversations with Patrick to help us understand, the ways we could architect this thing is always really helpful. Just bouncing your ideas off of somebody who's really an expert in the technology and who's, who works with it every day of their life is something that's incredibly valuable. And then, your account executive, in our case, Sarah, for the Imagine Grant, just being able to bring in, oh, you want to potentially use this product, let me bring in, the experts there and we'll have a call. Or I'm going to invite you to this seminar where they're giving an overview of this new thing. Or even there's a new beta feature that's coming out, not even released to the public, but we're going to give you early access. It just, it makes it feel, it can seem overwhelming, I'm sure, for people, especially if you're not already in the cloud, to migrate your technology there. But it's not as hard as it looks, and AWS is there to support you every step of the way. And so really appreciate the relationships that we've had.
Thank you, Andrew. And before we jump into the many Q&As that we have, Andrew, Bill, Emily, I would love to hear. A year ago, you were just starting to apply for last year's Imagine Grant, and we are at a year later. And I would love to know, where are you now with your project? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, My Digital Gut has launched. Irene, you've received your kit, as of
I did.
about 30 or 40 other people by this point. Our goal is to get to 70, and we're about halfway to our goal. So we have we have our front end UX that's launched. It's not currently open to the public, but it is, it's part of a beta testing program and part of our IRB protocol that we're inviting and recruiting people to participate. And so the study has kicked off. We don't yet have our data back from our first participants, but all the kits have been shipped, and we expect the data to come back, well, probably in 4 to 6 weeks after people start returning their sample. And so, we're super excited to actually get all those data in. And then once that happens, we'll also soliciting feedback from all of our beta testers on their experience, right? And so, how, did they find the data, the information they received valuable? How would they improve the product? How would they, what features would they request? And that's really the purpose of this initial test, is to iterate on the My Digital Gut to make it, easiest to understand, easiest to use, and ultimately ready for a much larger step of scaling this out to thousands or hundreds of thousands of people.
Thank you. Bill, you're next. Where are
Sure.
you?
Yeah, so one of the awesome and great things that reinforces that we're on the right track down here is, in that spirit of meet people where they're at and reach people where they're at, is, as I said before, not everyone wants to pick up the phone and call us, right? And once someone is, finally reached out, or finally has the courage to reach out to us, we have to meet them where they're at. And not everyone wants to go download a mobile app. So we're now seeing more people reach out to us through WhatsApp than our mobile app, right? And so that reinforces to us that, hey, we've started to answer the mail there, right? To be able to do that, right? And so we've seen that, right? And so that tells us that we're on the right track here, right? And so integrating subsequently with the other platforms and services means it's giving us that validation that we're doing that, right? And so and in addition to that, we're seeing more Spanish speakers coming across that app as well, right? Which is a demographic that is somewhat underserved. And so that really does give us that validation that keep going, right? And so just seeing that success of having that first solution out there with WhatsApp is huge, right? A lot more hard work to go, and a lot more communities that we need to be able to reach, but seeing that is awesome and great, because that means real human beings are getting to a real human being in a time of crisis for sexual assault and sexual violence, and we're there for.
Thank you. And we have got a ton of questions, and for the sake of time, Okay, we're gonna do a really quick rapid round. I'm gonna throw the question out there, and then one of you could take it, and then we'll leave some time at the end for a couple of QR codes. Okay, first question. Often technology transformation are responsive to a problem statement, but then sometimes, by the time the solution is already implemented or in production, the problem has changed. So how do you anticipate, how do you get ahead of the curve and anticipate the needs rather than forever responding to the problems? Who wants to take this one?
I'll jump in and start. So that's where you need to really think about, well, how do I build this as a platform, right? And how do you build the solution in a way that, hey, as the problems do change, how do you have the flexibility within your solutions and your architecture to be able to like in our case, like tomorrow it could be, King Cobra, today it's WhatsApp, but how do you build that solution in a way that gives you that sort of future proof to keep up with the changes in technology and the changes with what's going on, right? And the super awesome great thing with AWS is, hey, they're infrastructure, right? They're a platform, right? So therefore, be mindful of and thinking about like, hey, I'm not just going to build a solution to answer today's problem. How do I build a solution in a way that can answer tomorrow's problem specific to your mission and specific to your organization? So just always be thinking about platform as a service. How do I build a platform, right? And have the various inputs and outputs that it's regardless of what the input is or the output, my platform can scale effectively and keep up with the different challenges and problems that you may be facing.
Right, you're clearly a technologist, which we know you are. Okay, so I see there are a few problems pertaining the Imagine Grant. I will share the QR code at the end of this webinar. We have a tutorial video for the Imagine Grant application, and hopefully it could answer some of your questions here. But jumping to questions for the panelists. Okay, there's a question about defining the appropriate metrics to assess the effectiveness of your activities and research, especially for cloud technology projects. Who wants to answer that one? That's a great question.
I mean, in our case, at least, the scientific research was done. The algorithm, is performing to the standards that we want. So the metrics that we're interested in here are how do we reach people, right? And are we communicating, right? And so the idea for our My Digital Gut project is to quickly be able to stand up something. Of course, it needs to be working properly and working correctly, but quickly be able to get feedback on what we've done, right? And I think that's, I guess, one piece of advice is, you can, in a scientist, it's maybe not what we always do. Science moves very slowly. It's very, people think very carefully about the things. But in this case, where you're trying to reach people, how you communicate and get and the messages that you send, your first iteration might just be completely off, right? What you say, what people understand that you've said. And so being able to stand up something quickly, get feedback from real users on what they got out of it, and then iterate on that pretty quickly is extremely valuable. And so kind of fail quickly, if you will, and iterate on your failures to improve it. And with AWS, it makes it relatively easy to do that because I needed more of this infrastructure to build on. Well, I can always attach these things as I need to in order to improve my product. And so it makes it easier to fail faster.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And maybe one more really, really, really quick one. So someone was asking for organizations that maybe tend to have a more conservative approach to applications of AI, how do you create a collaborative internal partnership and not just risk control?
Ooh, I can take that a little bit. I mean, I think again, this fail fast build small. And I'd say for Mermaid, as a conservation organization, we think a lot, and we had a lot of early questions about how are we balancing the electricity and water needs of this. And by building, AI functionality into Mermaid and putting it out there for everyone to use, is that really in line with our mission? And so we looked at the data. We did a lot of deep dive there. We, balance that with what is the potential, what is the benefit of bringing these tools in, and then of course the reality that these tools aren't going away, and we can be using them while also advocating for how can we be using them as sustainably as possible. So, I'd say I think it's taking a very practical approach to risk. And I think it's focusing on those proof of concept stories, and really getting user testimonials to say, like, look, users are wanting this. It's going to help us build, it's going to help us scale. And so it's worth starting small. So I'd say we didn't pitch a whole AI unit and project and try to fund that right away. We started really small, which was a problem of, okay, people are taking photographs and they're, this is important data that can, inform coral reef conservation. But it's too slow and it's too error prone. So, what's the small piece of technology we can bring in? And I totally agree with you, Andy. The way that the AWS cloud, platform is so modular, we can really plug in and plug out things as we go. So it's a very flexible and experimental environment. And I think that's how we've been, particularly thinking about some of the more environmental or sustainability risks of AI, which was what we thought about at WCS.
Thank you. Okay, so we will definitely follow up on all the questions that we didn't address today. We'll also be sharing the panelists' email. If you have individual follow-ups, they have very graciously agreed to share their emails. So we'll have that. And before we close out, I want to share 2 resources with you today. First, AWS, we did a research on institutional funders' attitude and behavior on funding cloud or funding technology for nonprofits. And we have a report, 5 key insights and practical advice for nonprofits and funders. So that's the QR code to download. And then the second resource is the QR code for the Imagine Grant. So we've been talking about the grant all panel, and this year's cycle we just opened. It's available for you to apply. When you scan this QR code, it'll take you to our website. You'll download the round 1 instruction PDF with the tutorial video, all the round 1 questions, get yourself familiarized, and then please apply. We'd love to see your project getting pitched this year. And so with that, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Emily. This is such a wonderful learning opportunity for everybody. And I love hearing your stories and also learning about where you are today, a year later. And I can't wait to see your progress and yeah. And thank you so much for the impactful work that you do. We've had audience specifically thank you guys for the impactful work that you do. And we all feel that way. So thank you again for sharing your wisdom, your story, and your advice today with everybody.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Andrew, Emily. Thank you for that wonderful conversation. And on behalf of all of our nonprofit leaders in the SIS community, I want to thank you for sharing these insights into how they can supercharge their technology efforts. Thanks again to AWS for hosting this event today, and to all of our wonderful annual partners who make everything we do possible. It's with your partnership and collaboration that we can host these incredible events for our community. Thanks to you all for being here with us today. Next month, we will be in San Francisco for our big flagship summit, June 3rd and June 4th. So if you've not already secured your ticket, visit socialinnovation.com to learn more about being there in person. And thank you again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.